let's talk a little bit about what I'm doing here. So I'm running these perfect pitch experiments. Again, I don't really have any high hopes that I'm going to actually develop perfect pitch, but this is something I haven't really explored. And I have deeply explored the concept of relative pitch. I taught in university for several years, and I have a pretty good ear for relative pitch. So I'm very curious if it's possible to develop perfect pitch. And my basic premise is that if you're trying to develop perfect pitch, you don't want to use anything that actually utilizes the body. So, vocal tension, things like that, even mimicking a sound like you think C sounds like da or wah. You know, when you make those types of expressions, when you try and form those words, then it's kind of a muscle memory thing. And my theory is that you'll continue to use that muscle memory to identify the pitches, and therefore you'll always be slow if perfect pitch can be developed. So I'm trying to avoid anything like that. I'm trying to keep it all internal. And I realize there's a lot of different ways to probably go about developing perfect pitch. I think it's possible, just not on the level that you might achieve it if you were a baby and you were introduced to it very early on. So what we've been doing so far is working on C and D, but full disclosure here, this is not the only thing I'm doing. So if you watch the quiet ear, it's at the beginning of this perfect pitch experiment playlist, then you'll see that's an additional exercise that I do every day after this. The other thing that I'm doing is I am taking my own composing hour course because I'm creating it for a group of students. And essentially, what it does is it has aspects of perfect pitch training in there. The stuff that we know actually works, the stuff that I have seen with over 1,000 students have an effect on their ability to just improve with ear training and cognition of intervals and things like that. So we're also working on memory. And one of the things that we'll do in there is we'll play melodies with isolated notes. They're carefully selected notes. They're the ones that I want to work on at first, and we slowly build out. But what happens with that course, which I'm starting to notice now that I'm on day 6, is I'm starting to hear the pitches as their own unique characters. And, right now we're only dealing with 3 pitches that I'm kind of creating a melody on. So before I do that, let me guess my C. So I'm going to sing it so that you can hear it, but I don't want you to necessarily sing if you're trying this at home. You want to try and avoid that vocal tension. You just want to try and hear it in your head. Okay, so I was thinking a C and I played this note here. So I did get the pitch right that time. I don't always, this is not any indication of perfect pitch. This is chance at this point. And what I'm trying to do when I recall it is I'm actively trying not to feel what it feels like to actually sing, right? I don't want to accidentally start developing a sense of vocal tension to remember these pitches. So, sorry, dogs are barking in the background. So, what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you an example of something I do in the audiation course. Let's just say we have a C, a D, and an E. These are not the notes we're using. But if I play a simple 5-note melody, I'll give them a chance to audiate it. At first, I just want them to audiate from memory what it sounds like. Later on, what we end up doing is we try and visualize it on the staff system. And what I've been noticing now that I'm on the 6th day of doing this is what's happening is I am hearing each note as its own distinct sound. I still won't call it perfect pitch, but I'm hearing each note as something I can remember. So I'm not using relative pitch. I am just thinking about the sound of the note and being able to attribute it to a note on the staff system. So there is a change there, but I want to let you know I'm not just doing these perfect pitch experiments. I'm doing everything in the quiet ear, and then also I'm following along with my own composing hour course. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to make sure that is a very step-by-step course. I have a 52-week map for that. It'll be done in a year. But each week, I want to make sure that anything that maybe isn't perfectly explained is then enhanced in the next week so that I'm actually taking the course along with the students. So we're going to do some quick perfect pitch stuff today. And I'm just going to kind of go until I hear the quality of C, D, and E. Okay, so actually, I already hear it. It's very subtle. It's really hard to explain, and I don't want to explain. If you watch some of the earlier videos, you know I don't want to. But there is a subtle difference between each note. And that's all I'm looking for right now. I'm trying to, if nothing else, deepen my tone awareness. And that's this idea that each individual tone does have kind of its own character. And I want to prevent myself from going to any other notes right now because I want to just get really into the C, D, and E sound. Now, when you play a note and you prolong it, it starts to change the color of it just a little bit. So one of the things I discovered is right at the start of the note, that's where the color really is. So I hear a slight difference. So now I'm going to just compare them with the octave. Okay, so if you're not hearing this, I mean, I would say that's probably okay. Keep experimenting with your own instrument, preferably. I'm going to try and hear the colors harmonically now. So I'm listening for what that C sounds like and how the E is different. I'm hearing them side by side now. And the C and D. Bum, bum, bum. Just listening for it. It's kind of funny because you'd think that since I started with C and then I moved on to D, and then I added E. The C would be the one that I hear most strongly, but it's actually always, so far, it's always been the new note that I add. So at first I started with C, I added D. Of course, the D sounded fresh, but then the D kind of stood out to me more than the C for a while. But then when I added the E, now the E stands out, and I hear it as just a little bit brighter. So if you can't hear this, I'm going to try and describe it a little bit for you. So the E, I don't want to use anything too specific, but it's bright. It's bright. It's the brightest of the three. The D, it's softer. It's somehow more mellow, somehow more subdued than the E. See, I'm just comparing them. So if the C or if the D is kind of soft and mellow, the C is kind of dull. It almost has a little bit of an edge to it, though. And I didn't hear that at first, but I'm starting to hear the C has a little edge in it. But again, this isn't perfect pitch. This is me just being able to recognize that there's a subtle difference between these individual tones. Now, I'm going to go and actually look at some of your comments because I've been getting a lot of them, both email and actually on YouTube. You can see some of these comments. Yuri's been sending me a lot of comments. He's kind of doing his own perfect pitch ear training thing. And so I think that's great. I think you should all do that. And I think he's posting some of this stuff on his channel. If I can find them. Okay, we'll do it this way. So he's been talking a lot about, it sounds like he's following the David Lucas Burge course. So I am familiar with all of David's techniques, and I do think they work. I think there's just maybe a gap in some of the information where he doesn't completely explain everything. All right, so talking about his experience. So one of his most recent comments, it's going to be just a matter of training the perfect pitch skill. It will always be comparing only two notes until the nuance appears fast and natural. Like we get familiar with someone's son and don't need to remember the father anymore. But at the beginning, we always remember the father. It's a natural thing that our mind does. So, he's basically saying the same thing I'm doing here, where you're comparing only a few notes at first, you're getting used to the sound of them. What I have discovered in my own experience with the students that I have taught that have developed this, and that's why I'm now doing this to see if I can develop it. They have always said that when there's just two notes, it's actually a little harder for them. When we get into like 3, 4, and 5 notes, it's easier to tell the difference because there are multiple timbres to kind of compare. There's more information. But then, of course, when you get into 12 notes, now there's too many. So I think there's a fine line. And I think it also depends on where you're coming from as a musician. Like what level of ear do you already have? I found that people that have had no ear training at all, they can pick up on the sounds more quickly. People that have had a little bit of relative pitch training, it's hard to get out of that relative pitch mindset where you're constantly using reference pitches to determine what the other notes are. For me personally, I don't care about perfect pitch. I don't care if I develop it. At this point in my life, I'm very happy with my relative pitch. It's very fast. I can do everything I need to do with it. If I'm writing a composition and I'm trying to compose it in my mind, all I have to do is go to the piano, get my starting pitch, and then I'm good to go for the rest of the composition session. So I don't think that perfect pitch matters that much as a composer for what I do, because I can always use the piano as a tool. I can see how it'd be very useful for an improviser. I'm also a performer. I've played in various ensembles, and occasionally you have to play off a lead sheet. So relative pitch is really great for that, but it would be helpful if you knew the actual notes that you were starting on before the piece even began. But Once it's going, you just use your relative pitch. So I can see how having both would be a benefit. The only thing I'd be concerned about is if you have a really good relative ear and then you start to develop perfect pitch, if the perfect pitch actually destroys your relative pitch in a way, because I could see how that can happen. And one of the reasons is when you start to get used to the tone colors, like G has a certain sound, that G is going to be that G all across the keyboard from low to high. It's going to sound like a G. And a lot of times, people with perfect pitch who kind of do it naturally, they can't necessarily hear the change in octave register. I would have students who, this is an exact quote almost, student asked me, well, how can you hear the difference between a minor sixth and a major third? And, me with relative pitch and not having perfect pitch at the time, I was like, well, the minor sixth is wider. But I realized he was hearing the individual notes and he wasn't actually hearing the relative pitch aspect of it. So he didn't actually know what note was in the bass. And that can be something that can happen with perfect pitch. And that was something that I always had to train with people that did have perfect pitch. So in my classes, it was weird because I was training kids that had both perfect pitch and relative pitch. And by far, the majority of the class was relative pitch. But there'd always be at least one, two, or three students in every class, which is really unusual, that did have perfect pitch. And then towards the end of the semester and the end of the year, more students started to develop a little bit of perfect pitch. And so I didn't know why that was happening at first. I have my theories on it. It was the way that I was teaching things, the way I was having students really get into unlocking individual intervals, chords, the fact that we had this daily routine that started on C every single day. And so they got to compare these notes almost first thing in the morning for many of them while they were still asleep in my class and or at home, when we were in the pandemic, they were doing it online. But the point is, we had a system where every day we did this kind of fundamental ear training work. And the goal of it was I had so much to teach. We met 4 days a week. So I was able to meet with them Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But we met 4 times a week. We had an hour and 15 minutes per session. But there was so much to get through in those theory and ear training courses that I needed something to make sure every day I tapped into the fundamentals. And so that's when I created my daily routines and my mirror exercises. The mirror exercises are something I actually used as a graduate student. I created them and I used them as a way to teach myself the intervals because I wanted something both visual and something oral. So I would actually sing them back then. It occurred to me later that audiation was a better way to do it. And then in a teaching session, you have to have them sing because you have to make sure, one, they're participating, and two, they're singing the right notes. You can't obviously hear inside someone's mind. So I think those worked because every day they start on C. And the first one, daily routine number 1, I think it only goes up to about an E. And then it adds additional notes until eventually in daily routine number 7, you're doing entire major and minor scales. And I think this slow introduction to each pitch, because we'd work on daily routine number 1 for 2 weeks, and then number 2 for 2 weeks, So it was a very slow progression. When a new note was added, it was noticeable. And so the funny thing that happens when you're teaching is you don't notice this, you don't have the same experience as the person in the audience, the student, because the student is having information come at them. The teacher is actually creating the information and throwing it out to the classroom. And so there are multiple different things going on when you're teaching a subject. You have to be aware of where you're going. You have to be aware of where you are. You're watching the class. You're monitoring the room. Your brain is really maxed out in a lot of ways. And so you are demonstrating a concept, but you're not actually learning it, if that makes any sense. It's kind of a weird thing. Now, yes, teaching is actually one of the best ways to learn because students ask questions and you do learn from that. But when you are teaching a skill like perfect pitch or relative pitch, you're not actively involved in it, you're creating it. And that extra bit of effort prevents you from going deep and actually hearing things the way the students are hearing them. So my point with that is that it can be a little bit difficult to know why your exercises are working, but with talking to students, I started to discover over the years, okay, this is why this works, this is why that works. And it finally occurred to me, it's just the fact that we're coming back to that C every day. We're doing these daily routines, mirror exercises. They're fundamental drills. They work on the basis of our understanding of music, and they help people. So Yuri says that he notices that when the notes are played longer, it's possible to hear the overtones. So yes, the short notes are the real sound. So I think that makes a lot of sense, because one of the reasons I decided to start doing this is I just sat at the piano one night and I had an idea that maybe it's not actually the long part of the note. And this goes back to some university instruction where I would cut an audio file and play the middle of a note for certain tests, and the people with perfect pitch suddenly would get more wrong. Or I would play a cut off note, so it wouldn't give them the beginning, just kind of the middle of it and the decay, and they'd have more trouble. They could still mostly identify everything accurately, but they had more trouble when they didn't hear the front of the note. And these things, they take a while to formulate in your brain and come out as actual insights. But what I eventually last night, or not last night, but a couple nights ago, before I started this whole ear training experiment, I discovered that if I go to the piano and I play each note really short, I can more clearly hear a difference between each note. So that made me decide, okay, there's something to this. It's more than what I experienced in the past. It was getting deeper. And so I didn't want to start creating something or developing a skill without kind of documenting it. And so that's what I'm doing here. I'm documenting the progression. And these exercises, they need to be simple, they need to be easy. I heard someone say I should be using other timbres. I don't think so, not at the beginning. I do believe that eventually that's going to be important for comparison. And in the quiet ear, the kind of main lesson that goes along with these, I will play an oboe and a French horn and a piano, but it's very briefly. And my reason for not doing that is because I think you need to stick to one instrument at first, one sound, before you start adding other colors. Sure, adding other timbres will help, but I think right now, one of the reasons I'm a fan of the electric piano for this is because I want to eliminate some of the overtones. I want to get to the pure sound. I want it to be consistent every time I hear it so that I can get used to kind of the core sound. Then later, what I will do is I will upgrade in a way to an acoustic piano. And then I might start experimenting with other tone colors. But, it's all an experiment and we're going to see how it goes. So let me know how you're doing with this. If you're seeing any results, I'd love to hear that. And we'll keep doing this. I'm doing it for at least 30 days and then we'll see what happens after that. But now I have to get to a lesson. So I will talk to you later.